The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the webinar. Thank you for joining us. My name is Daryl Scott. I'm the instructional designer and trainer at ARC, and I will be your host for today. Now, joining me, I have Shelley Younger and Cassie Kilcar. They will be presenting the webinar Discover ARC Direct Connect and NDC. Now, before we get started, I do want to go over a few housekeeping items. The session is scheduled for an hour and it is being recorded. Now, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them in the questions section in the meeting panel. Now, at the end of the presentation, Shelley and Cassie will be answering the questions, and they will try to get to as many of the questions as they can. Now, if they are not able to answer all the questions due to time, there will be a Q&A document that will summarize all the questions that will be submitted. And that Q&A document will be sent out along with a copy of the presentation and a link to the recording. Again, thank you all for attending, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Shelley.
Thank you very much, Daryl. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us to learn the latest on ARC's Direct Connect program in NDC. We've seen a surge in airline interest to participate in ARC's Direct Connect program over the last couple of years, and we felt like it was time for both a refresher on Direct Connect and NDC, but to also talk about what's happened with ARC and Direct Connect and NDC over the last few years. I'm Shelley Younger, Director, Airline Retailing Strategy and Head of NDC, and have been at ARC for about 17 years and was part of the foundational meetings where you could kind of call where NDC was born. Prior to ARC, I worked at American Airlines for over 7 years in the travel agency auditing and servicing departments. And I'm joined by my colleague, Cassandra Kilcar, but everyone calls her Cassie. Cassie, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Shelley. Hi, everyone. I'm Cassie Kilcar, Senior Onboarding Specialist at ARC. I have been with ARC for the last 9 years, which also represents the extent of my history in the industry. I've worked in numerous different departments and positions in my time at ARC, but I've been with the settlement team for about 3.5 years now. I'm considered one of the subject matter experts on Direct Connect and NDC here at ARC, and as the onboarding specialist, I serve as the primary contact for any questions related to the ARC Direct Connect program, which includes testing, onboarding, and implementation. Okay, back to you, Shelley.
Thank you, Cassie. First, I wanted to kind of take a step back and look at the reasons why Direct Connect and NDC became important to the airlines and the industry. And like any other retailers, airlines want the ability to offer a consistent and personalized shopping experience across all channels. And by across all channels, we mean whether the traveler is shopping on the airline website, the TMC, agency, online travel agency, mobile device, or through corporate booking tool or various online shopping engines. They really wanted their product to be available and all products to be available across those channels. Airlines also wanted to provide both leisure and business travelers with specific targeted product offerings and eventually dynamically created bundles. We see very few, but a few airlines sort of dipping their toe in that dynamically created bundles today. Airlines also want more control over how their products are displayed, priced, and again, to make that experience a lot more consistent for the passenger. They want to understand who's shopping and again, eventually tailor that display and the product offering to the passenger. And historically, achieving these things that I just talked about has been a little bit more difficult to do in third-party channels with the technology that historically existed, although we've seen a lot of changes and a lot of moves forward in that arena. Next slide, Cass. So we hear the terms all the time, direct connect, direct connections, and NDC, and often they're used interchangeably. We did want to break this down and actually define the difference between direct connect and NDC before we move forward. So direct connect or direct connection, what is it? Or what does it mean, I should say, to us? So if you look at the screen here, when an airline provides access directly to their reservation and pricing engines and allow third parties to book, search, pay, and manage reservations, that is a direct connection. And this can be done through a couple of different ways. If you look at the top of the graphic here, you can connect to the airline's, again, reservation and pricing systems through an aggregator. And there are different types of aggregators in the travel world. So you might think of folks like Google Flights or Kayak, Hipmunk, and there are several OTAs that are also considered aggregators. But in this specific case, we're referring to the word aggregator in the realm where they're connecting the agency, the TMC, to the airline using some type of direct connection. So in this case, we're kind of thinking of folks like Skyscanner, Farelogix, Travel Fusion, or Atris. Now, it gets a little confusing because the GDSs actually can play a couple of different roles. They can play their traditional role, as we kind of think of it, where they're putting the offer together when the agency searches, but they can also actually play an aggregator role as well when they're connecting the agency to the airline itself. The direct connection can actually also be done through an API, which is where a third party and the airline connect directly. And that direct connection can actually also be done through a portal created by the airline. So that's that middle example you see. And of course, as we all know, the passenger can connect directly to the airline through .com or mobile app. So again, we just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea on what we mean by direct connection and direct connect. Next slide, Cassie. Now, NDC. Let's talk about what is that. You've probably seen this a few times, but again, just a reminder, NDC is a set of XML messages created by IATA, including a large group of industry players. And it's a communication protocol where airlines hope to eventually replace the existing sort of older protocols, which we know as EDIFACT in our business, which have been around since the 1980s. This set of XML standards is a lot more flexible and can contain things like rich content, bundles, dynamic offers. It offers a lot more opportunities to get information about who's shopping. And again, NDC is just a set of XML messages. So it's just one way that an agency or any third party can connect directly to the airline. And as we were going through this, Cassie and I always like to kind of put it in words that make a little bit more sense. And we wanted to find an example that was a bit more relatable. And so when you have an injury on your finger or anywhere, and you see the image that's on screen right now, what do you think of when you see this image? If you said adhesive bandage, I would be very, very surprised. I think you probably more likely said Band-Aid. And so for the most part, anytime we call any kind of adhesive bandage, whether or not it's truly the Band-Aid brand or not, most people say the word Band-Aid. And so that's a little bit about what's happened today with NDC and direct connection. Some people will say NDC and they actually may mean something entirely different. So we thought this was a bit of a fun way to kind of put it in context. And so everyone's referred to NDC for so long that it's kind of become the pseudo brand name for all types of direct connections, when in fact, it's really just an individual XML standard. Again, it's an important one because it's something that all people are sort of moving to use, but it is just one type. So now I've talked about direct connections in NDC, and now I'm going to turn it over to Cassie, and she's going to talk about how ARC supports direct connections. Take it away, Cassie.
Thank you, Shelley. I say all the time that, oh, sorry, I think, can you guys still see? There we go. Presentation mode. There we go. I say all the time that I seem to learn something new whenever Shelley goes over the history of Direct Connect and NDC. So I hope you all had some takeaways as well. So let's jump right in. This image might seem familiar because it resembles the graphic previously discussed by Shelley. However, the main difference here is the inclusion of ARC's role in this process. Once a participating airline and agency, and in some cases an aggregator, come to a commercial agreement on their direct connection, transactions can now be routed through ARC for reporting and/or settlement. This sales file can be reported to ARC by the airline directly or through a technology provider of their choosing. And this is a key difference compared to how transactions are transmitted to ARC for traditional GDS transactions. That typically would come through the GDS itself, like Sabre, Amadeus, Travelport, on behalf of the airline. Direct Connect transactions get loaded into IAR and also follow the same BOS file schedule for GDS transactions. Keep in mind, depending on the airline's business rule selections, there may be some differences in how an agency can interact with the transactions in IAR. And we will discuss this a little bit more in a couple of slides. Lastly, I wanted to address one of our more commonly asked questions by agencies regarding the onboarding process for ARC Direct Connect. There is a detailed and often lengthy onboarding process for airlines to be able to participate in ARC Direct Connect. The process begins with an application, followed by an extensive testing phase, and then implementation if all goes well. Once in production, it's not uncommon for ARC to suggest that pilot testing take place with an agency or agencies on that new Direct Connect channel. ARC would facilitate this discussion and help educate the agency on what to expect in IAR and beyond. Besides that, there truly is no onboarding process between ARC and the agencies for ARC Direct Connect. Okay. As Shelley explained earlier in such a relatable way with the Band-Aid example, direct connections and NDC are so often used interchangeably in the industry. So from this point forward, I'm going to do my best to use that phrasing properly. When I say direct connect or direct connections, it will represent both Farelogix as well as participating airlines in ARC's Direct Connect program, as you can see here on the screen. And if I refer to NDC, I would be specifically talking about that schema Shelley touched on earlier. Okay, for you history buffs on the call, yes, direct connections have been around for several decades, but for the purposes of our discussion today, we're going to start in 2006 when Farelogix began sending us transactions. Farelogix is unique in the direct connect space because they support direct connection between airline and agency, but once the transactions are transmitted to ARC, they look and act exactly like a GDS transaction. What that means is that Farelogix transactions are sent on ARC form code ranges, and they use the GDS system provider code assigned to Farelogix. So Farelogix is sort of playing a GDS role in this space. Direct Connect transactions would be sent on airline form code ranges instead of ARC form code ranges, and the system provider code would not be that GDS code for Farelogix. Instead, it would be the airline's 4-digit code, system provider code that was assigned to them. If you look on the left side of this diagram under the Farelogix logo, you will see that they've expanded their reach quite a bit since 2006. Listed there are the airlines whose Direct Connect transactions are being transmitted to ARC via Farelogix. But it is important to call out that there are other Farelogix customers that are not listed here. These are just the airlines that have sent at least one transaction via Farelogix to ARC for settlement and reporting. Another fun fact for those interested in the history of NDC itself, Farelogix actually donated their XML schema to IATA to use as the base for NDC. Listed on the right side of the screen are the airlines which have implemented ARC Direct Connect, starting with British Airways, who helped to pilot the program back in 2018. An even larger list is the one found on the leftmost side of the slide, titled Awaiting Takeoff. These are the airlines currently in our queue that have either begun testing or are awaiting to begin testing and onboarding for ARC Direct Connect. We are aiming to have at least a few of these airlines implemented by the end of 2022. Okay, I'd like to get a little interactive with you all just to make sure you're still with me. In the past few months, we've noticed a shift and have heard from some agencies that the pressure surrounding Direct Connect and NDC has increased quite a bit, and we'd love to hear from you. If this is the case for your agency and you've felt that pressure in the industry around Direct Connect and NDC, let us know by using the chat feature on the control panel, which should be on the left or right of your screen. Please don't use the questions feature, as we would like to keep that clear for questions only, but we'd love to see if that's the case for your agency. Let's see. All right, we haven't gotten anything coming in just yet. All right, so we will move on to volumes. This is a slide that everyone's pretty interested in learning about. Here's a graph that shows all current direct connection volumes. On the left axis of the graph is the volume and value, respectively, with the bottom axis representing the year dating back to 2018. The purple on this slide represents the Farelogix volume, and the blue represents the ARC Direct Connect volume. As you can see, Farelogix makes up about 97% of all direct connection volume. This makes sense based on what we saw on the last slide. They've been facilitating these connections for a long time and have many participating airlines. However, we are starting to see volume grow in the ARC Direct Connect channel as well. Looking at the 2018 bar under volume, there was just a teeny sliver of blue, whereas now in 2022, you can actually start to see that block of blue on all, comparing 2018 to 2022, year to date, of course, the ARC Direct Connect volume has increased from 1.7% to 5.8% of all ARC ASP volume. With more airlines implementing every year, we fully expect these volumes to continue to increase and move in the right direction. Great. So we often get asked if all direct connections look alike, and that answer is no. We are seeing that while NDC is an XML standard, there really is no standard to how airlines choose to configure their Direct Connect channel. Think of it as a non-standard standard, and it is definitely not a one-size-fits-all. As you can see in this table, there are variations in how an airline can choose to implement their ARC Direct Connect channel. This table also shows the differences in configuration between a Farelogix Direct Connect transaction and an ARC Direct Connect transaction. The Farelogix transaction should look familiar because it matches the configuration and behavior of a GDS transaction. While there are always challenges when tracking what each airline decides to do in each market with their direct connections, ARC has chosen to allow flexibility because it provides the opportunity to tailor direct connect with each airline's distribution strategy. During the onboarding process we touched on briefly earlier, each airline selects the functionality and rules they wish to implement for their ARC Direct Connect program. As you can see in the table, some of those business decisions are what file type they want to send in, forms of payment they want to include, and whether or not to lock down IAR. Lock down IAR, what does that mean? Since the offer comes directly from the airline, some choose to disallow edits to the transactions in IAR, like most of you would be used to today in IAR for GDS transactions. This means that the way it was issued is the way that it would be settled. So here in this table, you can see IAR modifications and error corrections allowed. That's the section I'm referring to here for locking down IAR. So we're not expecting you all to memorize the table we just displayed. So we recently revamped our Direct Connect website, and there is a section toward the bottom which outlines each airline's business rule selections. Toward the middle of the web page, there's an expandable list of airlines, which represents those in production with ARC Direct Connect. As you can see on the left-hand side of the screen here, that's an expandable list of all the airlines that are currently in production today. If you want to review the configuration chosen by each participating airline, you can do so by clicking the plus sign in the far right corner. And this will display the table that you see on the right-hand side of the screen with the airline's business rule selections, similar to the table we just referred to. You can go to that website at the bottom, and I believe we will be sending these out. You can also just Google ARC Direct Connect, and that should bring you to our website as well. So one topic we won't dive too deeply into on this webinar are the differences for agents in IAR once the transactions are loaded to your sales report. So there's a lot of information on this screen, but I'm going to touch on a couple of these at a very high level by going over another really common question we get asked, which is how a Direct Connect transaction can be differentiated from a GDS transaction in both IAR and elsewhere. The easiest way to tell these different transactions apart in IAR is the airline direct indicator. So there's a checkbox in the top right corner of the financial details screen. Some of you all may be familiar with that. And if that is a GDS transaction, that box would not be checked. If it were a Direct Connect transaction, that box would be checked. In addition, there is a drop-down menu for system providers on the list screen in IAR, and that can be used to select all Direct Connect transaction providers or just a particular airline, ARC Direct Connect airline. The final way to differentiate, as we kind of touched on earlier, is the form code range of the ticket itself. For Direct Connect, that would be airline stock, and for GDS, it would be ARC or neutral stock. One very important note here is that if your airline uses Farelogix to issue your Direct Connect transactions, you would not be able to differentiate these transactions by the airline direct checkbox or the form code ranges, because again, those are going to come to ARC and look and act the same as the GDS transaction. However, you can select Farelogix in the System Provider drop-down menu, and that list should represent your Direct Connect transactions that were issued via Farelogix. Okay, so we'll walk through a couple frequently asked questions, and then we should have plenty of time to answer any other questions you may have submitted through the presentation. If you haven't already, there is still time, so go ahead and go to that questions bar in your control panel and ask away. I'll probably be on the screen for a couple minutes going through a few of these frequently asked questions, and then we'll invite Shelley back on camera to start going over some of those. So the first question is, how does a travel agency get started with Direct Connect? So that is going to vary and depend a little bit on, sorry, I think that screen, okay. So that's going to depend on the airline. Everyone's a little bit different, but we do on our website have probably toward the middle of the Direct Connect website page, maybe toward the bottom, we have logos of all the airlines that are participating in ARC Direct Connect. And those airlines are have their own individual NDC pages, most of them. And if you click on that logo, it should take you to the website that they've designated is the location for their NDC information. If that does not work, you can also just do a simple Google search by typing in the airline you're interested in learning more about, and then followed by NDC. That typically should return the results that you're looking for how to get started with each individual airline. Again, there's not much of an onboarding process with ARC unless there's a pilot test that needs to occur. So connecting directly with the airline is how you would get started. Are Direct Connect transactions included in the IAR BOSS file? Yes, they are. GDS and Direct Connect transactions are both included in the IAR BOSS file. Are there any debit memos issued for Direct Connect transaction? As with debit memos in general, that is very dependent and will vary by airline. I think the goal with direct connections are, to minimize those as much as possible, since that connection is direct between airline and agency. But of course, those still happen. We do still see debit memos even with our direct connect transactions. But that, the frequency and if that happens will depend on the airline. And then do airlines send all direct connect transactions to ARC for settlement? Not always. Each airline decides which transaction to report to ARC for settlement. So as we saw on that table before, that truly is up to the airline which transactions they're including. But we do highly encourage that all transactions be reported to ARC so that the agents can see all the issued transactions in their sales reports in IAR. Okay, I'd like to invite Shelley back on camera and we can start going over any questions that were submitted. Shelley?
Great, thank you, Cassie. So we have a number of questions here, and I'll start by kind of summarizing. There are a couple that are pretty long, but I'm going to summarize them as best I can. There's a general sentiment sometimes in the industry and a question around airlines kind of leaving the GDSs, and that direct booking will bypass ARC and bypass the GDSs. And so there's a question around that. And also what will happen to ARC in that situation. And so I'll stop there and answer that question. There are, as I mentioned kind of earlier in the program, there are different types of direct connections. And if you think about it in your traditional GDS world today, the GDS takes a couple of different things and pulls them together. So they take schedules, they take fares from ATPCO fare filings, and then they actually take the airline availability and they put together that price either for the agency, either through an automated tool or through the agency manually kind of creating that ticket, that transaction. That's been in place for a really long time. And the technology that kind of runs that hasn't been able to really expand with what the airlines kind of have wanted in more recent years. Things that I just talked about, knowing who's shopping, being able to send back a variety of pictures, being able to bundle offers. And so direct connection is a way to do that. And that is a way for third parties to come into the airline's reservation system itself. And it actually doesn't always bypass the GDS. The GDS in some cases actually plays that role of aggregator. So in fact, you can see in the GDS, especially if you use the GDS's kind of user interface, you can see both GDS sourced content and you can see direct connect content. And sometimes that's the same. In other may not. You may be able to get access to certain ancillaries that may not be available in the GDS. In some cases, there are some airlines that are offering different kinds of fares through the Direct Connect channel than they do in the GDS channel. So I wouldn't necessarily kind of categorize it as a GDS bypass because again, many, as you'll see definitely over the next couple of years, airlines are going through the GDS as an aggregator. Now, in terms of ARC, we've seen a couple of different things happen. We have seen transactions bypass us, and we definitely don't want to see that, but we do understand that that's in some ways the way the industry is going. But we also have many other airlines that have seen the benefit of reporting transactions through us. So the agency kind of has one central spot, and they often understand that makes it a lot easier to do business with the airline if the airline sends transactions through us. And so we actually see more airlines than not coming to us wanting to send transactions. So we're in a position where we want to kind of position ourselves to be beneficial to both sides and to offer a product that the airlines will want to actually come through and report their direct connect transactions. Another thing I'll add on here is that typically for cash form of payment in the direct connect world, using NDC, those transactions are often going to come to ARC because we have the established relationships. So I hope that answers at least part of that question. Another piece of that question was around agencies being responsible for refunds in the Direct Connect channel. And that's actually something I can't answer. Typically what happens, you will initiate a refund just like you would when you did the shop and you issued the ticket through Direct Connect. And that refund message will either be authorized actioned by the airline, or it will not. In terms of the responsibility, that's going to be based on your commercial agreement with the airline and how you've set up Direct Connect. So let's see here. I'm going to go down and go through a couple of more questions here. There's a question about, do we get ARC voiding ranges for NDC tickets? I'm not 100% sure exactly what that question means. So if you want to add to that, feel free to go back into the questions and add a little bit to that. I can take a couple of guesses, but I'd rather get some more detail on that before I answer it. Another question here is, someone has, say they've been on WorldSpan for over 30 years, and they issue a lot of tickets for tour operators for tours. And so the question is around, why would I want to use Direct Connect with NDC, with anyone, including Farelogix? And again, I kind of go back to what the reason was for Direct Connect. And there are multiple reasons there, but I think to kind of get to the root of your question is, you may be able to get additional content that's not available in your existing channel. There may be a variety of bundles that are put together specifically for the Direct Connect channel. Often ancillaries are available in the Direct Connect, that's hard to say a few times, Direct Connect channel that aren't in other channels. So for the tour part, I haven't, to be honest with you, I haven't heard as much about tours and groups in the NDC world. It often tends to be more sort of individual or family shopping, more around sort of leisure and corporate as opposed to group business. So I can see maybe why you haven't heard as much around that. I don't think they're quite that far yet in that using NDC for that. So let's see, I'm going to keep going here. So a question around Direct Connect carriers. Are agencies booking on the individual carrier NDC website? So if you think about the airline reservation system, so kind of put aside everything for a moment, and if you go on to whatever airline.com or use the airline's mobile site, you are accessing that behind the scenes. You're accessing that airline's shopping and booking engine, their reservation systems, what the airline has to kind of function their websites. When you use a direct connection, you can do a couple of things. You're accessing that airline's sort of pricing engine and merchandising engine behind the scenes and reservation system, e-ticketing database. You're accessing all of that either directly through a technology kind of connection, or in some cases, the airlines are using a portal that the agency can go through, which is a little bit different than their kind of external facing website. They are often creating a portal just for agencies. So you can do that, or again, you can connect through some of the aggregators that I mentioned before, or your GDS as an aggregator. So there are multiple ways to actually get into the airline itself to get their pricing. So has a question about, okay, thank you for clarifying your question. So the question was around, has any airline changed sort of the void window for NDC and Direct Connect? And for those of you that may not know, today in ARC and the US point of sale through the traditional GDS channel, most of the time the agency has until the next business day right before midnight to void a ticket. Now that decision is still wholly up to the airline. So the airline can still enforce a 24-hour or next day void window in the US if they want. They just would not return an authorization if you did decide to void. But again, most airlines are sort of following the next business day at midnight window. The airline in the Direct Connect case has the ability to follow the 24-hour window, next day window, next business day window. It will be their decision on which void window they want to follow for Direct Connect. We see some airlines giving the same void window as the traditional GDS, and we see others that have decided to change that void window. And Cassie, I don't think we have that on our website today, is what the void window is for each airline. So there is a suggestion if there's a way to get that on there. So we will take a look at that. Thank you. So again, sort of more question around why is direct connect necessary, and is the airline calling all the shots? I'm going to use the words that were in the question. And I guess to be honest with you, it depends on your point of view. If you're looking at sort of the past 30 or 40 years and the technology that's been in place, there probably was time for a bit of change to kind of get the airline itself wants to get out of being considered just a seat on a plane. Each one has put a lot of money into their products, and they want to kind of market and put their products out there the way they want to. And the way I kind of look at it, and it's funny, Cassie and I have talked about this a few times too, and and I apologize, it's a very simple example, but it's the best example that I can come up with, is, when you go into the grocery store, and I don't know if you've ever noticed, but when you're walking down the aisle, unless you're ordering online, like a lot of us are doing these days, but if you still go actually into the grocery store or Target or Walmart, and you're walking down the aisle, if you turn and actually stop for a second and look at the shelves that things are on, the product itself, they've actually, in many cases, told that retailer exactly how they want their product to look, how they want it turned on the shelf, how they want it faced, where it is on the shelf. There are a lot of things that they do to market their product, and the airlines are really the same. And really anyone in the travel industry is the same, and not just airlines, hoteliers, car rentals, all of those folks want to retail their products. And so in order to do that in the way that they could on their own websites, in many cases, that's one of the many, many reasons why Direct Connect was born, is to take advantage of the newer technology. Now, some's going to argue always that it is meant to be a GDS bypass, but that, in the meetings that I was in, that was not the discussion point in the creation of NDC and Direct Connect. So hopefully I haven't beat that dead horse there. Again, questions about voiding. Again, that is going to be up to each airline, what their void, they can set their own void window. Again, they can do that today in the GDS. It just so happens that most of them follow our current guideline, but they can pick their own void window for Direct Connect. Question around the volumes. What are the typical volumes that you see participating airlines expect to establish in direct connection with NDC? Wow, Cassie, I don't know if you want to jump here on this one, but this is all over the place to me. Do you see anything different? There's really no way for us to actually know ahead of time, correct?
Yeah, no, I agree, Shelley. And we often ask when we're having these initial conversations with them, we're always curious to know, like, do you have any kind of anticipated volume? How many agencies are you talking with? And kind of getting that idea of how that volume is going to look. But it really has been all over the place. I agree, Shelley. Some more than we'd expect, some less. So it's really all over the board.
Thank you. Another question on the void window. I think I've probably beat that one to death, so I won't go back into that. The next question is around, does Direct Connect require an additional accreditation or payment to be able to use, and how do we access Direct Connect? For ARC, on the ARC side of things, there is no additional accreditation required. And even in some cases, there are airlines that are willing to allow a VTC to come in and issue Direct Connect transactions. Because again, the airline is the one actually issuing the transaction. But in terms of ARC and our accreditation, typically there's nothing else you need to do. It's a conversation that you start with the airline and let them know you have an interest, or in some cases, the airline is coming to your agency asking if you would like to be a pilot partner. And so that's really how it starts, is between you and a conversation with the airline. Another question is, do we have to sign up with each airline for NDC or Direct Connect? Yes, you do. That, again, that is, even if you go through an aggregator, like some of you are using Travel Fusion or Skyscanner, or again, the GDS can be an aggregator, that is still an agreement, a commercial arrangement that you enter into with the airline itself. Those aggregators facilitate you getting to those airlines using Direct Connect, but you do have to enter into some sort of an agreement with the airline. Let's see, I'm gonna go through here. Do Direct Connect also apply to code-share bookings? Do Direct Connect and NDC bookings also apply to code-share bookings? And I'm not gonna be able to give you a direct answer on that one. It's going to depend on the airlines involved. What I'm seeing most right this moment, again, things can change, are typically kind of direct, not code share, but I know for a fact code share is planned, and it wouldn't surprise me, again, folks like American and British Airways coming together. Both entities are very strong in the Direct Connect market and Direct Connect using NDC. So I'm not seeing necessarily a lot of it right now. Those of you that are already doing Direct Connect, maybe you see something different than we do here, but I know that it is coming. You will definitely have access to code share bookings at some point. A couple other questions. One that I'm not 100% sure I understand, but I'll make a guess at it here. The question, I think the question is around Direct Connect reservations. Will you have to see two systems? And that could be taken a couple of ways, but the answer is maybe. And by that, I mean, if you're going through somebody like a GDS as your aggregator, you will actually have, you can have Direct Connect content and GDS content come to you in the same screen. All the GDSs, the major GDSs I've seen either have that today in some sort of pilot or mechanism, or they're working on it. In fact, I've seen them at a couple of different conferences where they've shown me that content. So that's actually how I know that they have it. So in terms of, do you have to have two different systems for that? No. But if you have a GDS and you decide to work with a separate aggregator like Travel Fusion, then yes, you would in fact have two different systems. And I hope that answers your question. If not, let me know, and I'm happy to take another stab at it. How does an agency access NDC pricing through existing GDS systems? So what I would recommend that you do is you go to your current GDS and talk to them about what they have available. All three, the big ones here in the US, have aggregator capabilities. And I would highly recommend, happy to go out and we can shoot the websites out to you, but each major GDS has their own website around Direct Connect and NDC. And I would highly encourage you to reach out to them, or if there's an airline that you're interested in, reach out to them and talk to them about how you can connect directly through the GDS. There's a question, Cassie, I'll swing this one over to you since people are probably tired of hearing me talk. Do errors come through as they do now?
I don't think we could ever get tired of hearing you talk, Shelley, but happy to give you a much needed break. So errors, it depends. That question, as we kind of saw on the slides, that table that we showed, this can really vary by airline. So the two options available when they're deciding how to handle errors, the first is loading them to IAR like it's done today in the GDS channel. That would then give the agency the opportunity to correct those errors and submit it through their sales report, and then obviously over to the airline through the CAT file. But there's also another option that was kind of introduced in this ARC Direct Connect channel that allows the airline to actually prevent that error from loading to IAR, and then it's returned to the airline to make the correction themselves on a rejection report. So instead of that error loading to IAR, we actually just turn it right around, send it back to the airline, and then they would do that correction and submit that transaction again. So kind of the agency impact to that, and is a little important talking about, is the fact that there might be transactions that are issued if there's an error, depending on the airline's arrangement and business rule selections. They may not see those transactions in their sales report when they would expect them. If there was an error, that could be, you know, a day or two or more potentially before that gets loaded into IAR successfully. So definitely a great question and important to understand. And Shelley, I don't know if it's a good opportunity. You know, we will be touching on these for anyone that's had kind of NDC conversations already and would be interested in a little bit more of an advanced deep dive into IAR and some of those key differences we just very briefly touched on in the presentation. We will be holding a second webinar that's kind of intended for those that are maybe a little further along in their NDC journey and interested in kind of getting more detailed level understanding of those differences in IAR.
Thank you, Cassie. Yes, I think we're looking at maybe somewhere in the November timeframe. Is that correct, Cassie?
Yeah.
That second in-depth webinar?
I think that's right, November.
Okay. You guys will get a notification on it, but feel free to join that. It definitely dives a lot deeper than what we're covering here. So just a forewarning there. The next question is pretty complicated, so I would prefer to answer that one offline. Barb, if you would shoot me your email, or you're welcome to reach out directly to myself at syounger@arccorp.com, or you can reach out, include Cassie, is ckilcar@arccorp.com. I'll take your question offline, but if you could give me your email, I'm happy to follow up directly with you, and we can kind of dive down into a little deeper on your questions. Next up is, does each airline have a separate Direct Connect website, or is it somehow centralized? How do we know who to contact at the airline? All great questions. Each airline is sort of, if you think about it, it's their own individual entity, right? So each of them are going to have a different Direct Connect program. So if you decide you want to connect directly to that airline individually, yes, you would work with each individual airline. However, for those that don't want to go through that, you can use again, an aggregator like your GDS, like Skyscanner, like Travel Fusion, like Atris, like Farelogix, to actually connect to multiple airlines using a direct connection. The question about how do we know who to contact at each airline? So that depends on a couple of things. If you have a sales representative already at the airline, reach out directly to them. If you do not, each airline has a website and a contact information on that website. And again, you can go to our website and connect to each one, or you can Google, as Cassie said earlier, and it will link you directly to the airline's website on Direct Connect. And there's always sort of reach out, or do you want to chat with us, or form more questions? And you're welcome to use that. Typically it's an email address. Every once in a while there's a phone number. And feel free to reach out directly to them to get more information about their Direct Connect program. All right. Let me see if I can combine the next couple of questions here. In terms of the pricing differences between the GDS and Direct Connect, that is really all over the place. It's not something, honestly, that we get into. Those commercial arrangements are completely outside of ARC, and it is very unique between the agency and the GDS and the agency and Direct Connect. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to really get down into detail there. There's a lot of questions around sort of conveniences on getting Direct Connect using NDC with every airline. And there's a question around today, there's an agency that's connected through a specific GDS. And there's a question about how convenient would it be to get Direct Connect with NDC. And that is going to kind of depend on your GDS. The GDS that you're working with right now, I know, has direct connections. So I would highly encourage you to reach out to their help desk, or if you have a representative that with that GDS, if you're having trouble getting connected, let us know, and we're happy to reach out to the GDS and get you some type of connection or an email that you can at least ask questions. So definitely follow up directly with us. Question about the basic differences between the GDS and NDC. That one's a little longer. We went into it very briefly early on. Once again, Wendy, happy to go offline with you and talk a little bit about that. If you want to shoot me over your email address, happy to set up a little bit of time and walk through that. And in terms of how does this connect to IATAN, this does not at all connect to IATAN at all. So it doesn't really have anything to do with the IATAN program whatsoever. A question about not seeing COPA in the chart that we showed on the screen. And from time to time, we hear from a variety of airlines that just reach out and ask initial questions. The airlines that Cassie mentioned on the screen earlier that were in flight are airlines that have actually gone through a process, sent us an application, and are actually either waiting to test, in testing, or waiting to go to production. So we are hearing from other airlines outside that list. They're just not necessarily always as far along as what we see here. So we are coming up on time. And thank you, Barb, for sending your email address. We'll get directly with you. Can you tell us again how to view the chart on ARC's website and where it shows if we can edit or modify? Cassie, can you go back to that? Thank you very much. At the bottom of the screen here, you'll see a website. If you want to take a screenshot of that, you can do that and then put that into your browser, or you can actually just Google ARC Direct Connect NDC. It will pull up a couple of different areas, but you can click in one of those links and you can find this. If you're still having trouble finding it, feel free to reach out to us directly. We're happy to kind of help you navigate. So we're coming up here on time. I thank you, Cassie. Thank you so much for walking through it. We really appreciate your time and all of the great questions. And I'm sorry if I wasn't able to get to one. We'll do our best to either reach out to you or answer via our written Q&A. Thank you. Daryl, I'm going to turn it back over to you to close out.
All right. Thank you, Shelley. And thank you, Cassie, for providing a great presentation, a lot of good information, and a lot of good questions as well. I want to thank all of our attendees for attending today. We appreciate you taking the time from your busy day to join us for this great presentation. I do want to remind everyone that a copy of the presentation will be sent out along with a link to the recording and a Q&A document that will provide the questions and answers that were submitted through the meeting. I also want to let everyone know that we have 2 webinars coming up this month. The first one will be held on Thursday, August 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and that is the payment acceptance, driving results through collaboration. We also have one on Wednesday, August 24th, and that's discuss ARC IATA training and overview of agent skill building, and that will be presented by one of our colleagues from IATA. And then next month kicks off the ARC Annual Fraud Awareness Month, which begins on Wednesday, September 7th, uh, with the Fraud and Risk Insights for 2022. So I do encourage that everyone be on the lookout for invites, and if you are able to attend these webinars, encourage that you do so. Again, I want to thank everyone for attending, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, and goodbye.